Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Byron, for moderating such a great discussion. Byron, we'll see you back here to moderate the Q&A session after our keynote. But it's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this year's Schul Forum. Dr. Andre Perry is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a scholar in residence at American University, and a columnist for the Hechinger Report. He earned his PhD in education policy and leadership from the University of Maryland and served as the founding dean of the College of Urban Education at Davenport University and as an associate professor at the University of New Orleans. He is an award-winning journalist and activist in the field of education. Dr. Perry's work focuses on race and structural inequality, education, and economic inclusion. Throughout the pandemic, he has traced why COVID has disparately impacted the health of the Black community, mapping the policies that have led to the outcomes we have seen. His latest book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, is a powerful corrective that challenges mainstream framing of disparate outcomes in the Black community and challenges us to center our solutions in shifting the discriminatory policies that repeatedly recreate disparate outcomes. Dr. Perry is a regular contributor to a number of news platforms, and we are grateful that he has agreed to contribute to our conversation on economic mobility in the Charlotte region. Dr. Perry, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Lori. That was a wonderful introduction, and I want to thank that last panel. That was fire. And I really resonated with it because I was a former dean, a former associate dean, longstanding professor of higher education. I worked specifically on public-private partnerships. In particular, I ran the Capital One University of New Orleans Charter Network. It was a small network of 4 charter schools. And I learned a lot about what a university can do, particularly your regional universities, very important in terms of our community. And I really do believe there's a mission of urban universities that they must uphold, because we must be the good neighbors and steward the kinds of research and service projects that elevates communities overall. And certainly we must provide the teaching to that will expand all of our horizons. Again, thank you for having me. And certainly Chancellor Gaber, this is great. You'll love my presentation because it has a lot of urban planning in it. And I understand that you have that background, probably you know more than me. I'm hoping you can see me and not the big L on the screen. I see an L on the screen. I think it's highlighted. You might be seeing that. Hopefully we can get that corrected. But, oh, you do. You see me. This is good. I'm going to go right into my PowerPoint because a lot of how I'm going to introduce myself is in the PowerPoint. So let me share it. Okay, worthy of investment, restoring value to Black communities. A lot of what you will hear today, don't worry, I'll make the slides available, but you can also get a lot of this information in my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, available wherever fine books are sold. As was mentioned, I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, where I study Black majority cities and neighborhoods. As you can see on this map, this is a map of the Black majority cities. Clearly, there's way too many neighborhoods to put on a map for it to be legible, but these are the Black majority cities. There are over 1,200 of them, and they're actually growing in numbers. And I study the assets in them because when you invest in housing, businesses, infrastructure, it raises economic mobility. And as you know too well, as being last on that list that was put out a few years back, Ross Chetty's list of economic mobility, something is not being invested in. That's what we should assume. You know, one of my favorite quotes by Tek Tak Han is, it goes something like this. If you have a head of lettuce and the lettuce isn't growing, you don't blame the lettuce. You look to see if it's getting sunlight. You look to see if it's getting rainwater. You look to see if the soil enriched. You never blame the lettuce. But when things go wrong in Black communities, we blame the lettuce. And so I want to use that metaphor to launch my research and an introduction into this topic. Let's start with homes, and let's start with my home. This is where I grew up, 1320 Hill Avenue, Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Wilkinsburg is a small Black majority municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on three sides. And as you can see here, the home is abandoned, it's boarded up, the roof is falling apart. It's only worth a few $1,000s. You can pick it up if you agree to pay taxes on it to this municipality of Wilkinsburg. But the home means so much more to me. That woman in the upper right-hand corner, her name is Elsie Boyd. I call her Mom. As the story was told to me, Mom made a deal with my then maternal grandmother to take me in when I was born. When I was born, my mother was poor. She already had a child at 17. She had a child at 15. She had me at 17. And my mother was probably abused. And so Mom did what a lot of matriarchs did at the time. She took in kids from around the community. And you can see she took in a lot of kids. She took in Black kids, white kids. Some would stay a few weeks, some would stay a few months. My brothers and me would stay until we graduated from high school and went on to college. But there was another reason why she had to take us in. My father, pictured here, his name is Floyd Criswell. I never met him. He was a heroin addict. He was in and out of prison. He was eventually murdered inside of prison, inside of Jackson State Penitentiary, a facility right outside of Detroit. Now, one of the stories a lot of the stories were told to me, he made bad decisions that landed him in jail. So what I wanted to do for my book, for Know Your Price, is to get to know my father. And in doing so, I got to learn about the built environment that surrounded his decisions. And so, without question, and many of the panelists mentioned this, that he grew up or mentioned these issues, but both Mom and my father grew up in areas that were redlined, where the Homeowners Loan Corporation drew red lines around their neighborhoods, deeming them unworthy of federal investment. They both lived in areas where highway construction and other forms of construction displaced them from their communities, forcing them to move. They were subject to urban renewal, the unfulfilled promises of urban renewal, predatory lending, excuse me, and they were surrounded by racial restrictive housing covenants, where the deed said only a white person could live in this area. Now, I wanted to look at all of those things and its impact on today's society. So I started looking at one particular area, and that's home prices. On this chart, you can see on that x-axis, that's the share of the Black population in a zip code or a neighborhood. On the y-axis, that's the average list price of homes in that zip code. And so you can see as indicated on the top of this bar, the price of homes, the average list price of homes from both Zillow data and census data is about $340,000 here. And it's pretty linear. As the percentage of the Black population goes up, the price of the homes go down. And you can see in areas where the Black population is 50% or higher, those homes on average are priced about $184,000, so about half as much as their white counterparts. But a lot of people will say the reason for that is because of education, because of crime, because of other things. So, but those are things you can control for in a study. And that's what we did. We took that absolute price, but we control for structural characteristics. So the size of the home, the square, the number of rooms, all the physical manifestation. But then we controlled for neighborhood amenities. We controlled for education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics, because I wanted to get a apples to apples comparison between homes in Black neighborhoods and homes in areas where the share of the Black population was less than 1%. And what we found pretty much astounds that homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, a loss of about $48,000 per home. Cumulatively, that's $156 billion in lost equity. Again, this is not over time. This is 2017 data. So in 2017, $156 billion was lost simply because of the concentration of Blackness in the neighborhood. And this is occurring all over the country. And so wherever you see a magenta circle, that's where homes in Black neighborhoods are priced lower than their white counterparts in those metro areas. Wherever you see a green circle, that's where homes in Black neighborhoods are priced higher. There are places, but there's far more magenta circles. Just to give you an example, Charlotte, 13%, about $23,000 per home. Again, this is occurring all over the country. I mean, look at Lynchburg, 81% difference. So if you helicoptered a home in a Black neighborhood and placed it in a neighborhood with few Black people in it, with similar education, similar crime rates, it would increase in value by 81%. Rochester, New York, 65%. Jacksonville, Florida, 47%. Detroit, 37%. There are places where the homes in Black neighborhoods are priced higher. Nashville, Tennessee, plus 10%. Wichita Falls, plus 16. Boston, everybody's always surprised by that, 23%. Now, like I always say, Boston is no less racist than Lynchburg, but the home prices are higher. But $156 billion is a big number. It's a big number. I wanted to put that in perspective because, folks will ask, what is $156 billion? Well, $156 billion would have financed more than 4.4 million Black-owned businesses based upon the average amount Black people use to start their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based upon the average amount of a four-year education. Replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan, 3,000 times over, covered nearly all of Hurricane Katrina damage, and it's doubled the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. It's a big number. Now, I put that last bullet there for a reason. If my father lived in areas in which his homes were at market rate, the white rate, he would have had better schools. Remember that education financed on the assessed value of homes. He would have had greater opportunity to start a business, go to college, better infrastructure. His drug use probably wouldn't be criminalized. His life and my life would have been different. That's why I say that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. Again, when things go wrong, we blame the lettuce. We blame Black people. We say, what's wrong with Black people? They even say, you need to go to school. There's get an education, these things. And trust me when I say, I am a big proponent of education. Again, I was a longstanding education official, higher ed official, professor. I study higher ed, study community development. But we often get that issue reversed, that education predicts for wealth. No, wealth predicts for education. When we extract wealth from people, on the daily, we hinder their ability to go to college. We force them to take out college loans, make them work when they should not have to. So I go to this quote that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. Because if we want to solve this economic mobility problem, let's look away from what people are doing and let's look at the policies that extract wealth every single day without anyone batting an eye. Now, I'm going to show you a quick clip. This is me testifying on Capitol Hill a few years back to the Financial Services Committee. Now, this is before all of the reports on appraisal bias started to appear in the daily news. We were at this hearing to look at this issue of valuation models, or should we change them? But during the hearing, when I presented my data, most people were astounded by the numbers, including many, across both sides of the aisle, they were troubled by it. And Representative Al Green asked us a very basic question. Do we feel that there's discrimination in the valuation of homes? Take a listen and look at this dramatic exchange. Oh, hold on. Sorry about that.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now. We're getting some consternation, I see.
I'll just say this, that people deny racism. They'll say, oh, it's classism. I didn't break any laws. In fact, many of the appraisers after the hearing came up to me and said, I didn't break any laws. I just want to be clear about this, that the definition of structural racism is that you don't have to break the law. The law produces the disparate impact. The practice produces the disparate impact. And that's what's happening every single day. People aren't breaking the law per se. They're not, I was going to say they're not carrying tiki torches and hoods, but we know that happens. But that's on rare occasion. What mostly happens is this kind of discrimination that we just accept as normal. Now, and it goes all over the place. I just want to show you a few slides on this housing issue before I jump into business quickly. See that blue line? This is, that line represents you're fully banked, that there's that the population have checking account and other bank related services. And you can see Black people are most likely to be unbanked. And it's not coincidence that banks are exiting Black communities en masse across the country. And so I just want to throw out a few solutions to this issue around home ownership quickly before I move on. We have to increase support for small dollar mortgage loan programs. In many communities, there are mortgage programs or there are more homes available, but we don't really have the vehicles for small dollars mortgages. So we need those. We need to reduce uneven costs of mortgages for Black homeowners. We still get higher interest rate, even though we qualify for better interest rates. We need to extend credit and down payment assistance to borrowers impacted by discriminatory housing policy. So we need to figure out ways to provide assistance to those who were redlined. We need new credit scoring practices. We need to increase diversity in the appraisal profession. 90% of appraisers are white, 75% are male. And continue stimulus and relief efforts for homeowners and buyers in the wake of COVID pandemic. Now, I will say this, one bright spot in the homeownership realm it was that when in I think the second and third quarters of the pandemic, there was actually an increase in home ownership among Black millennials. People will ask, why did that occur? How did that start to happen? Well, certainly when shops were closed, people had more discretionary money. Everybody saved more money. They had more money in their pocket. But something else was transformative. We froze student loan repayment, right? And we kind of did an experiment. What would happen if we cancel student debt? It would really help Black students a lot, because we of the Black population, we have to take on more debt because we were once assets, we were once owned, we precluded from having property, precluded from getting many benefits of the New Deal. So we have lower wealth profiles, and so we have to take out loans. And so when we froze them, positive things happen. So I'm going to encourage debt cancellation at the highest levels when this freeze is over in January of 2022. But I want to get on to business quickly because most people start their businesses using the equity in their home. And we know that businesses help churn local economies. So if you have less equity in your home, you have less businesses in your neighborhood, you have less development overall. But a lot of people will say the reason why there's less investment in the businesses is because of quality. The service is bad in Black communities. So we wanted to look at those issues as well. I'm just going to throw out some stats. Black people represent about 13 or 14% of the US population, but only 2% of the nation's employer firms. Only 1% of Black business owners were able to obtain a loan their founding year, compared to 7% of white entrepreneurs. Again, most people in general start their businesses using the equity in their home. Black entrepreneurs are denied bank loans more than twice as often as their peers. And when we do get a loan, we get them at higher interest rates. About half of Black businesses survived the Great Recession, compared to 60% of white firms. And that we don't know if those numbers will probably be similar this time around, because of the way the PPP loan program was initially structured. It did not let out loans to sole proprietorships, and by the time, and 95% of Black-owned businesses are sole proprietorship. So we were essentially locked out. So it wasn't a white-only sign, but it essentially had that effect on Black communities. But I wanted to deal with this issue of quality, because people will say Black businesses are not of quality. BIPOC businesses are not of quality. So we want to explore that issue. So we got business revenue from Dun & Bradstreet. We also got the race of the owner. But we scraped all the Yelp data from businesses all across the country to get that sense of quality. And then again, we control for neighborhood conditions, education, spending power, and other issues. And what we found may surprise some, that Black, Brown, and Asian-owned businesses are actually rated higher than their white counterparts. It's not significant, but statistically speaking, but they are higher on their ranking. Now, however, there's a caveat. They get fewer stars in Blacker neighborhoods. I'll explain. See that magenta line? That's Black, Brown, and Asian-owned businesses. See that gray line? That's white businesses. Again, a Black, Brown, Asian owned businesses actually are higher than their white counterparts in every neighborhood. But again, as the neighborhood gets Blacker, the ratings go down. You see how Black people are penalized by our perceptions. And so this is costing highly rated businesses upwards of $4 billion annually. And it basically is meaning that people are going into Black neighborhoods less than they would if those businesses were in white neighborhoods. One of the fears I had about releasing this report is that people would say, I'm not going to put my business in a neighborhood, in a Black neighborhood. The reality is we have got to figure out ways to invest in Black businesses. There's the saying that the elders used to say on this topic. They would say, our ice is just as cold. Our ice is just as cold. The elders knew before I put this report out, that they knew that if you don't frequent businesses in the hood, quality businesses in the hood, you distort the market in a way that forces high quality businesses to compete with low quality businesses. You get less revenue overall in the community. That revenue doesn't bleed into the neighborhood, and you get less development overall. And so their wisdom then holds up empirically, that we have got to frequent businesses in the hood if we want to encourage economic mobility. And I'll just give you, I want to throw a few numbers at you just so that you can see the potential of this. Black people comprise about 14% of the population, but 2% of employer firms with more than one employee. If Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population, there would be more than 800,000 more businesses added to the economy. 800,000 more businesses. In Charlotte, Black people are about 24% of the Charlotte metro, but only 3% of the employer firms. If Black businesses were the equivalent of the Black population, there would be more than 12,000 more Black businesses. In this regard, equity is stimulus. If we invest in Black businesses, we widen the proverbial pie. On the panel, there was a comment made about this notion of scarcity. Well, and that's so true, because so many people think if I invest in a Black person, I'm taking away from a white person. Well, in regards to underappreciated assets, those are the Black businesses. Those are the Black homes, meaning if you add water, it will grow. You'll see the kind of growth that currently doesn't exist. We are currently investing in other areas. So we should be investing in the areas in which will add to the overall ecosystem that these assets are in. Now, how do you counter devaluation overall? First, you got to invest directly into people. You got to direct capital to Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian-owned firms. Cut the check, I like to say. Now, because what happens a lot, we invest in a lot of place-based investments, opportunity zones, but those largely are in brick and mortar structures. If you invest in brick and mortar, in buildings, and other non-human entities, guess what happens? You raise property values, people don't keep pace, and then eventually they are pushed out. So you got to invest in people first and foremost. And you got to remove the unnecessary bureaucratic barriers to entry for entrepreneurship and homeownership. I don't know how many programs I've been in or been exposed to where they make the participants do some type of financial literacy course so that they can get a grant or a loan. Well, as we saw in the business example, Black people don't need an education any more than other groups when it comes to running businesses. And so we need to stop making us go through all these unnecessary bureaucratic barriers. Again, everyone needs an education. I'm not saying that education doesn't matter, but it's not the reason why we see these gaps. Now, we do need to invest in place. I mean, because of devaluation, there's just less resources in the area to animate the assets that exist in it. And so you're not beautifying the place. You're not fixing up the infrastructure. So you do need to invest in some. It just can't come at the expense of people. And in regards to incentives, where I do believe we do need to incentivize people from citing their businesses in Black neighborhoods, so that the resources can spill over into the neighborhood. When you have investments in Black neighborhoods, you more likely to hire from the neighborhood. Those folks are more likely to spend. The money stays more in the local ecosystem more. Then you must divest from racism. You got to remove policies that extract wealth. In regards to housing, appraisers use a price comparison model where they compare homes to others in the neighborhood to get a sense of value. Well, the problem with that modality is, one, it was a practice used to help keep Black people out of neighborhoods. Two, if you only compare homes to others within a neighborhood that's been discriminated against over time, you essentially just recycle the discrimination over and over again. And so we need to figure out ways to evaluate homes differently. Just like I looked at homes across a metro area, we can do the same in terms of valuing homes. Just as we score budget policy or policies against the budget, we should score for racial equity as well. There should never be a policy or program put forth that doesn't look at its potential impact on people of color from the front end. We should not have to correct like the PPP loan on the back end. So when we are creating policies, when we're essentially creating initiatives, private public partnerships, funds, you better show that how it's going to benefit the various racial groups and be honest about it. Because look, I worked in education reform, and for a while, it was almost as if we were resourcing white-led organizations and not investing in the districts and the Black-led organizations that have been doing the work overall. But it's not enough just to remove things, divest things. You got to install anti-racist policies, policies and practices that promote inclusion. Now, a lot of this you can find in my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, available wherever fine books are sold. In closing, I do want to do this because what I try to do is make a heart case. I talk about my father, talk about my family, try to make a head case, love talking about data. But sometimes that won't work still, because sometimes you'll have people on a panel that will say racism doesn't exist. And so I draw a lot from my book from in fact, I named my book after my favorite play in the whole wide world, Two Trains Running by August Wilson. Now, in that play, the main character, Memphis, is about to have his property seized through eminent domain by the city of Pittsburgh, in which the main character, Memphis, says, I'm not going to sell my property. Now, the city offers him $15,000. And in response, Memphis goes, I'm not selling for $15,000. I got my price. I know my price. I'm paraphrasing, but it's a refrain said throughout the play. There's another character, Hambone, who is struggling, and to get a meal, he asked to paint a fence in exchange for a ham. Now he paints a proprietor's fence. He does a great job on it, but he never gets his ham. And throughout the play, he goes, give me my ham, give me my ham, give me my ham. Now, we don't know if Hambone is his name. We don't know if Hambone had mental illness before he painted the fence, but eventually he goes mad and dies, demanding his ham. Well, there's actually a happy ending to this story, because I know whenever I tell that part, people go, damn, that's pretty sad. Well, the happy part is Memphis, the main character, gets $35,000, well above the original price that was offered. And it's assumed that he is getting the white rate or the market rate. Now, the moral of the story is you gotta know you have worth. You know, what I try to do with Know Your Price is get people the price to stand on, even if it means going crazy and dying. I got news for you. I mean, I'm being sarcastic. At some point, you need to make a demand for change. That economic mobility is not going to change because of the niceness of your major anchor institutions. We're going to have to push them to do better, to invest in Black communities, to invest in business, to invest in homes. In Asheville and other places, you have reparations programs, and it will require public-private partnerships, university partnerships that make tuition free, that doesn't shoulder students with debt. And so at some point, though, you got to stand up and make a demand. I'm going to close it there. And because I'm looking forward to this panel discussion or to this question and answer session, but I want the folks of Charlotte to stand up and push, because if we do not, we're essentially going to be in the same place a year from now, the year after that, and the year after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. Thank you for that amazing presentation and for the slides. I was almost late because I'm just jotting too many notes down to keep up. And I have seen 2 Trains running, and it is powerful. So I still recommend it, even though you gave away the ending. People should really, if there's ever an opportunity to see it, I recommend it. I know that there are questions in the chat, and my colleagues are capturing those. And I'm seeing virtual applause, so I think you definitely struck a chord. Let me just start by asking a question, particularly given your last comment that I asked the panelists at the beginning, which was, what is your definition of economic mobility? And I'm really curious as to how you might help us define that aspiration in light of this charge to know and hold our price.
Well, I mean, for me, if you ask me my deeper meaning of it, not this sort of academic term, but for me, it represents power. Who has power and who doesn't? Because those who have power have economic mobility. They have the ability to have quality schools. The systems work for them. Even if they don't go to school, they don't end up broke and homeless. I mean, so for me, it's about power. It's also about the neighborhood conditions in which you live. Many neighborhoods simply don't have the stuff in it that will elevate them and their families. And so we need to look at those neighborhood conditions, those social determinants of health, those overarching conditions that elevate or throttle your growth. So for me, it's really about power, but it also encompasses the neighborhood conditions, the businesses, the homes, the infrastructure, all of those things. When you're not moving socially, it generally means you don't have the kinds of things or in abundance that will elevate you, because there actually is lots of strength in Black community, lots of strength. I mean, I always got to tell people there's over $609 billion worth of housing assets in Black communities, $609 billion. So we, there's power there, but there's a lot of things that's throttling that power over time. So we need to figure out ways to remove those barriers to success.
Another just kind of immediate question from your talk is, because right now, like all over the country, we are in the midst of this crazy housing boom, right, where prices are accelerating. I live in Hidden Valley, which is a historically Black neighborhood in Charlotte, and so it's this mixed bag, right? I paid 3 times more than what the previous owner paid, and yet I also know this neighborhood is undervalued in a host of ways that longtime residents like my neighbor Tom, who's lived there for 40 years, knows full well and has worked through. And so just wondering, how do we, in the midst of this pricing boom in housing overall, come to grips with the racial disparities you're talking about? What's going on, and what do we do how do we make sense of it, and what are the ways for us to address it?
Well, if you have assets, the pandemic was pretty much good for you. I mean, if you have 401k, if you have real estate, all these things are elevated by the pandemic. If you do not, you're just farther away from your peers. One of the reasons, there are several, but another reason why we don't have the assets we do, because we primarily work in jobs that don't offer the retirement benefits, that don't offer a 401k plan, that lots of things that I enjoy, most of Black Americans do not. I mean, only 1 out of 5 Black Americans could work from home. I believe compared to 3.5 out of 5 of white Americans. And so when you couldn't work at home, guess what? You're more likely to be exposed to the virus. Black people are more likely to live in intergenerational housing. So people brought the virus back home. And one of the reasons why we have higher death rates, Hispanics have higher death rates, because we are forced in those jobs that don't necessarily encourage wealth creation. So for me, it's about figuring out ways to give people more than a living wage, to also give people the kind of benefits overall that will enhance their wealth profile.
Some of the questions that are emerging, have to do with the systemic racism. Some of your comments, I was jotting it. It wasn't a white-only sign, but it essentially had the same effect. Let's look at policies that extract wealth every single day. So on the one hand, there are these policies that we need to address. But you also talked about, these what seem to be individual decisions as to, will I patronize a Black business or not? Will I choose to buy a home in that neighborhood or not? Which feel like this individual, personal, intimate decision. And I wonder if you could help us reconcile that, how the impact of policy, reconcile that with sort of the impact of hearts and minds to make decisions.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I struggle with, because inherent in my quote, "There's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can solve," is a belief in policy influencing behavior. But behavior can influence policy. These are policy decisions that we're making. And so for me, we need policies that encourage business ownership, business development. We need policies that encourage um, us not extracting wealth. So I certainly think if you have policy, behaviors will follow. Now, not all that doesn't always happen. We've had discrimination laws on the books for a while, and people still skirt those from time to time. And so I say all that to say, I'm a big believer in policy. Particularly now at this time where individuals are struggling to believe in policy, and sometimes are outright rejecting policy, and that is negative. But I just want to be clear. You increase your likelihood for sustainable change when it is anchored in policy. So we fight to get policy, because once you establish it, it's more than likely those policies will stick. That's why it's taken so long for us to get rid of these discriminatory policies, because they, our behaviors essentially were the crafters of those policies. And so we just need another culture to take hold. I talk a lot about reparations a lot. And I say this: reparations won't come from Washington. It'll go to Washington because there's a reparative culture in our cities. Redlining didn't start from Washington, D.C. Started in places like Baltimore, where the mayor then drew red line, or not drew red line, but deemed certain neighborhood too hazardous or contagious because Black people were in them. And these policies were picked up all over Wilmington, Wilmington, North Carolina, and other places. You had these sort of informal policies that were geared at suppressing Black talent. So you had it all over the place, and eventually it bubbled up to the federal government, and they took it to scale. I say this: we need to do more at the local level, make demonstrations of inclusion at the local level. And if we do that in enough places, then we can take that to Washington and scale it.
Can you speak a little more to that? Kailas raises this question of if in fact policy is the driver, and especially given the current political climate and the challenges that you've pointed out, how does the community frame these demonstrations and their successes? How do we frame them for policymakers in order to make the kinds of progress in terms of policy that you're talking about? What tactics or strategies or framing?
Yeah, and this goes back to my head case, heart case, and the demand. Like, I do believe in making a head case. I mean, I wouldn't work at a think tank if I didn't say, let's put up some numbers. Now, what I will say that, and this speaks to the conversation of assets in the first panel, too often researchers come in and say how bad a city is or how bad Black people are doing. What we should be doing more of is showing what's good in the community and to show the potential in a community. The reason why on that, in the deck, I show what would happen if the share of Black employer firms match the population, because people don't understand that, everyone wins if we did this. And so we need to do more of that. I mean, too often, like I said, researchers talk about how bad things are. And that gives like a negative psychological effect. It creates a negative and psychological effect where people see that Black people have to catch up to white people for there to be parity. No, we just need to get rid of this racism and invest in Black communities. We'll be fine. Everybody will be fine.
Right.
And so, but we just don't do that enough. I mean, it's always what went wrong. and what is wrong. And so just like, Charlotte was shaken by the economic mobility studies, we also need to have studies that show what's right. You gotta have some balance in the force. And because if you don't point out the strengths, you never invest in them. Like, nobody invests in deficits. Nobody goes around, I want to invest in that bad school. No, they don't really. What happens is you invest in people to fix deficits. And those people who are doing the fixing gets enriched, right? It's like, and in education is littered with white saviors for that reason. We'll invest in people to fix communities. No, you should just be investing in the community. Invest in the housing, invest in the businesses, invest in the infrastructure. That's where the investment goes. As soon as you start trying to fix somebody, you're wasting dollars. Yeah. Because the people getting the real investment, they're getting, they're growing. They're the lettuce that gets the water, the sunlight, and the rich soil. So we've got to do a better job of investing in strength, and seeing strength. Because even my devaluation work, I do it because I wanted to be able to calculate what we needed to restore in order for things to grow. So I'm blanking on the amount in Charlotte, but whatever that 20-something% is, that's what we should be trying to restore in Black communities. And so that gives you like a real target, not just going, oh, woe is me, we're the worst. No, you actually can be much better if you restore that value. And if we increase the number of businesses, if we increase the number of homeowners, if we if we cancel student debt, things like that. If, I don't know the policies at UNC Charlotte, but let's be clear. Many students collect fines and fees and they don't get their transcripts for what? And that's a form of wealth extraction. If you're not paying library fees and small things, it probably means that you are low wealth. And we should not hold them up because they're low wealth. And so, in fact, there's a group of regional colleges and universities. There are a few all scattered throughout the country are now moving to expunge these fines and fees for trivial things because it just holds up students too long. And students don't want to come back to school, and you look and it's because they have $750 on their bill, $1,000-something on their bill. And you got to go, okay, is the cost to society, does that outweigh this fine for not bringing in your library book?
Right.
So, and again, I'm a former college administrator. I get it. I understand that we got to balance books like everyone else, but we also have a role to play in society. Are we going to elevate us and increase social mobility, or are we going to throttle it with silly policies?
Yeah, I think Charlotte Mecklenburg Library went fine-free this year. Similar kind of thinking. One issue that came up often in the panel, it's in the comments now. It hasn't taken me long as a new resident of the community to really experience the really deep pain of past efforts around redlining, urban renewal that have, in some cases wiped out Black neighborhoods, the ongoing gentrification of Black neighborhoods through the boom, and even now, as new development moves in spaces and places like Brooklyn that used to be there, really kind of as a community reconciling with this is certainly seems to be a challenge in addressing a lot of the issues you're talking about. I wonder if you have seen or might suggest a kind of restorative approach.
Yeah.
Appreciate the policy, but the community beyond just the policy, and there's tremendous, attention to policy in the city's 2040 plan, for instance, to equitable growth. But what's a restorative approach to kind of reconciling the pain of what we've been through in order to move forward?
Well, I love what these local communities, including Asheville, Evanston, these local reparations program. Now, a lot of people will say that's not reparations, and technically it's not. If you define reparations as a congressional act, and that if it primarily is a redress to slavery, and it involves a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of some type. However, like I said, when local municipalities start fighting back, it really does reflect the nature of injury. It wasn't just the federal government that redlined people. They had to have complicity with local governments. And so local governments have a responsibility to step up to that injury. And so for me, it's about making sure each municipality gives itself a chance to repair, or at least attempt to repair, because it's the monetary or a material change that will help, but it's also just creating a reparative culture overall. We've built a society on exclusion. We have no idea how much more we would grow if we built a society on inclusion. And that should be the focus moving forward. In fact, well, maybe it's not, we shouldn't deem it as growth in that same way. Maybe we should call it something else. But we know how to weed out kids to get a better college or university. We know how to give people less housing, which essentially elevates some school districts over others. So predominantly white school districts get $23 billion more than their counterparts or their BIPOC counterparts, $23 billion more. Because many white communities they'll say, not my backyard, and a number of the other NIMBY attitudes, but mostly because of segregated housing, we have uneven school financing in this country that really needs to stop. So I say all that to say that we need to establish a reparative culture. This is not just, we do need to cut the check at the local, state, and federal level, but where there's the willing, we need to show that we're able to do something at the local level.
One of your slides, the slide where you talked about invest in people, invest in place, divest, from racist practices, right? And I think, the invest in place, I think we often, at least conceptually, get in divesting in racist practices, as difficult as it is, comes up. But the invest in people part feels like often like the thing that is the most difficult to do. The example you gave of, the financial literacy obligations,
Yeah.
right, seem perfectly reasonable until you point out the obvious, which is why, right?
Yeah.
What is sort of behind those penalties that we just gloss over? Is it just blatant racism, or what is it that we've built into, you know, our efforts here that hold to those?
I mean, we generally believe Black people are broken, and the way to growth is through repairing them. And again, we don't blame the lettuce, you know, and so Black people don't need to be fixed. We need to be invested in. And so, but that's so ingrained. And this, you know, this fundamental belief in the American dream of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's well and good. But it's not the reason why white family median wealth is 170,000 compared to 17 for Black families is not because Black families aren't working hard, aren't pulling themselves up. Actually, you know, we are in many cases. It's because the federal government empowered and enriched people when they were down. And it wasn't just the New Deal, like I said, the PPP loan issue. When white business owners were hurting because of the pandemic, guess what they did? They said the federal government needs to respond. Well, what does it look like when you've been socially distanced for generations? You know, what kind of stimulus package should we get? Because we've been denied housing, business subsidies. Then GIs couldn't take advantage of the GI Bill. You know, so it goes without saying slavery, but you know, we've not received that level of investment. But people will say all day long, hey, you know, take this financial literacy course. And even to a certain extent, again, even this belief in college, you know, because I believe in higher learning, regardless if it gives you a job or not. I just believe that's what we are built to do, is to think and reach our highest selves. And I think college is how you do that. And I would I encourage my kids to go to school beyond getting a job. You know, it's not about getting a job. It's about being free, more so than anything else. But a lot of people will say go to school as a way to abdicate their responsibility for investing in housing, investing in jobs, investing in infrastructure. They'll tell the person, go to school, do better for yourself, overcome. That's invest in people. You know, no, like it's crazy. It's crazy. You know, so for me, I you know, it's hard for me to say this because when I talk to colleges and universities, you know, every once in a while, some people get offended because I say, you know, colleges and schools are important anchors, but they're not the only anchor. You if you're going to really try to uplift people, uplift their economic mobility, you better talk about housing. You better talk about infrastructure. You better talk about energy. You got to talk about education. You got to talk about transportation. There's lots of different things. There is no silver bullet, you know. So, but there's this fascination to say, oh, education is the next great civil rights issue of our time. You know, so is healthcare, so is housing, so is transportation. I mean, like all these things have to work together. And right now, I actually think we put way too much on schools and colleges. We say, you do all the work. In fact, you see this, employers have a nasty habit of, if we could just fix the schools, everything will be all right. No. I hear you not wanting to pay taxes, not willing. I hear you not wanting to take on students and train them because it will take some of your revenue. But it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I don't want to age you, but you and I are probably around the same age. It wasn't that long ago where part of our training actually occurred in a job, like an externship, an internship. Like, it wasn't this, you have to go to high school, then to college, and then prepare to get it. No, it was, you do some summer work. You do some externship while in school. You know, there was all these opportunities to do that. Now they're like, fix the school. And then what they're saying is, I don't want to invest in people anymore.
You know, you gave the example of co-ops, and when I was when you were responding to a previous question and giving this idea of a restorative culture, you glossed over Asheville or Evanston, and Eric Orozco asked, you know, if you could maybe highlight 2 or 3 examples of initiatives and programs where you really have seen this reparative action starting to happen, and things that we could you know, kind of latch on to really move in that direction.
Well, the obvious was in 2020, in aftermath of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and a number of other incidents of hate. You saw people, you know, some of it was PR, some of it was to say, I want to get the mob off my back. But a lot of it was people then really reckoning with, George Floyd had COVID before he died. He was struggling to make ends meet. Housing in the area was, you know, homeownership was half for Black as it is for whites there. And people will go, oh, wow, this racial justice stuff is real. Like, we cannot go on living like this. And so that's the obvious. And I think there are initiatives. I like Evanston giving $25,000 in grants and down payment assistance. It's not enough. It's not nowhere near the amount that was extracted by redlining, but it's just something, because when you talk about $25,000, $50,000, I should say, that's the money people actually is missing when they're trying to own a home. A lot of people simply don't have the down payment. They actually have the credit score. They actually, you know, they have the behaviors. They don't have the asset. They never had the asset. If you don't have the asset, it is hard to come up with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. If your entire family, if your entire community doesn't, you're most certainly not going to just find it. So I like what Evanston is doing. I like what I'm hearing. I hope Biden cancels student debt. I'm still hoping on that. But some colleges are starting to do it on their own. And I'm blanking on the name, but there's several who's using recovery money to cancel debt. I like it, because when you're talking about wealth, there's 2 variables there. There's your assets minus your debt. Now, getting rid of debt doesn't necessarily give you a lot of assets, but it does help. And so for me, you know, those kind of initiatives are good. And we just need more of them, a lot more of them. And we need them at a scale. You know, I used to say all the time that we need to change our state merit aid programs and make sure that we limit them to low wealth individuals. Like, many state merit aid programs, they essentially reward the rich for being, again, wealth predicts for educational outcomes. And so if you're wealthy, you better get good grades. I mean, like, it's hard not to when you're wealthy. So yet we give them the merit scholarship. The people who actually need it are the low wealth individuals who just missed the cut, because if they had wealth, they have probably gotten the scholarship. So for me, it's like, we need to start removing debt and giving people assets so that they can grow.
I wanted to ask a question related to students as contributors and assets. Chancellor Gaber mentioned 30,000 plus students at UNC Charlotte, for instance. There are a number of other higher ed institutions in the region. All of those students by the thousands graduate. And it strikes me sometimes as someone who's engaged in how we make the connection between student learning and community challenges, that, we often don't orient students as to how they might enter the community with an orientation in the way you're talking, in terms of where they live and where they patronize. And I just wonder if, what would be the orientation, or what should the orientation be as folks for young people who are entering the job market to or entering these decisions of life, to take them on and view them differently than maybe the lenses and the biases that those of us who have perpetuated? How might we prepare that generation? And do you see them perhaps addressing their life choices in ways that might be different and might provide more hope for getting to where we're talking about?
Well, I will say this: we speak about higher education now as if it's a bank where people go in, get their deposit of information, and leave in a very utilitarian type of way. We need to really think about college as a place where people get values, in which charity, trust, love for community are really elevated. You look at the body politic now, and it is not healthy. I mean, you have arguably many collegians acting like fools in the street, believing conspiracies, denying facts. There were people on that panel with college degrees who were denying facts.
You mean the video
The video, yeah. The video, some of them, I'll just say some of them, I don't know of all of them. Some of them had college degrees, and they can sit up there and not necessarily tell the truth. You shouldn't be a college grad and do that. And I'm not saying that getting a degree is going to preclude you from lying, but what I'm saying is that the mission of the college should be deeper than giving you the skills to get a job. And more and more the talk is about, can you get a job upon graduation? Not about are you a good citizen while you're there?
Right.
While you're there, are you a good citizen? Are you a part of the community? Are you a student teacher in the local school? Are you volunteering in the hospital? Are you inviting neighbors over to the sports game? This is the other thing, is the unemployment rate of residents next to the university better than it would be if the university wasn't there? You better add value to the entire community. Oftentimes, we only show the value added to students. We talk about the students. What about the entire community? What benefits packages are we offering the cafeteria workers, the people driving the buses? That's a reflection of our values. And so for me, these universities are not valueless institutions, but they feel like it now. They feel more and more like they're banks. That I go in, get my services, and walk out. I don't have to talk to anybody. This is what I'm signed up for. Give me my stuff, and I'm going to leave. No, it's about touching the community, improving yourself. Remember when I talked about, I really do believe in higher learning. I really do. Like, I want to be the best version of myself I can possibly be. And you do that by reading good books, having good conversations with diverse people, by making field trips in the community around the world. That's how you become a better person. And we got to facilitate more of that.
I appreciate that, the intersection of values and policy and practice, and the charge to institutions like universities, like companies and others. You see the call for your run for presidency in the chat.
Oh,
wow.
No, my
and I think a lot of what our panel was saying earlier was that intent to try to shape those institutions and to articulate that connection in ways that you're talking. So this is
I'm going to steal a line when I say Dr. Perry for president. I'm going to steal a line from the great writer Roxane Gay. She said, "My past is too filthy." So yeah, I can't run for any public office, but I do have a vision. I do have a vision for higher education and for communities overall. And I will say this. I used to say this about K-12 schools, but it's somewhat true. It's not the same as a K-12, but as in higher ed as it for K-12. But I used to say for K-12 that kids don't live in schools, they live in communities.
Yeah.
And because when people say, if we could only fix the schools, everything will be all right. Nah, kids don't live in schools. And likewise, students certainly reside in dormitories and on-campus living, but they're a part of a larger community. And we got to go back to that vision, particularly for urban institutions, that for urban institutions to serve their highest calling, they have to help the local community.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think our strategic plan, really pushes that connection in a more deliberate way, and I see that our colleagues at Johnson C. Smith and others, and other kind of anchor institutions, even as they're expressed here in the community. So, we're going to wind down here, and but I want to ask you, and this was kind of Mr. Triggs asked this early on, and I want to come back to it, which is, your head, heart, and artistic, appeal to us notwithstanding, this is still a hard talk, right? I think you described that where we're heading is a place we've really never been as a country. You don't really know what it looks like to be a truly inclusive society. So I want to ask, are you optimistic that we'll get there? And if so, why? Help us end with some sense.
I'm very optimistic. Let me tell you, one, I never take this for granted. My father was murdered in jail. You talk about economic social mobility. the reason why I'm here is because someone years ago decided to invest in me. And in my community, it wasn't just me, it was a whole slew of children. And so the fruits of that woman's labor, the civil rights leaders of the past, we're actually seeing what can happen. Yet for them, they had no idea 40, 50 years from now, these things would be happening. And so while I'm encouraged, the things I'm doing now, I don't see immediately 40, 50 years from now, you're going to see the work. But already this year, President Biden put in my research in several of his executive orders. I have helped usher an interagency task force on appraisals. Students, I can't believe this. I have a social entrepreneurship competition. We're giving away upwards of $100,000 to organizations who are working on housing devaluation. If you have ideas that you think can combat housing devaluation, if you have new credit scoring systems, new mortgage programs, new zoning ordinances, new whatever, credit scoring systems, you name it, we want to hear it. Google Brookings Ashoka Challenge, Collaborative Challenge. And we're doing that. So if you are an entrepreneur, you're looking to get involved in this, we want to invest in you. But I'm excited because, I think I'm handsome. I think I'm smart. I have all these different things. So a lot of my research is doing well now. But that summer of 2020 was on fire, and it elevated me. Because people were like, wow, this structural racism thing is real. Who's talking about more Black books were being bought, read, more policies were being introduced? I'm optimistic. Today, look, I got the 1619 project right here next to my WAP pillow over there. But 1619, somebody get that screenshot of that and send that out. Nicole Hannah-Jones, changing the world. When I say I have to be optimistic because, we're changing the world. But again, there's going to be pain. We're feeling the pain right now. It's conspiracy theories, people shooting people in the street. There's going to be a lot of pain. I'm also a realist. There are evil people out there, but we are also experiencing change, and that change is going to be painful. So, but I'm optimistic. I gotta be. So go out there. Let's go get them. Let's fight.
Dr. Perry, thank you. Absolutely. No, and this idea that acknowledging the pain and don't let that discourage our movement forward, I think that really resonates with what we heard from our panelists earlier, and certainly with the spirit of the Schul Forum and the great research that's being done through the Gambrell Fellows. So thank you for really bringing this home for us. We greatly appreciate it. I know there's applause out in the atmosphere. I don't know if you can sense it, but I certainly can. We appreciate it. And I'll turn this back over to Dr. Thomas to close us out.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Perry. As a well-trained fixer, I'm really grateful for the challenge to focus our fixing at the right level. As a leader of a research institute, I hear the challenge to focus our research also on assets and the often too invisible role of racism in our outcomes. Thank you so much for what you've brought us today. Thank you, Dr. White. Thank you to our panelists and Gambrell Fellows, to the Schuls, the Gambrell Foundation, and thank you to our audience for your questions, your thoughtful comments. Thank you for spending your afternoon at the 2021 Schul Forum. We will post this video on our site after Thanksgiving. May we all leave here today with renewed conviction and energy to invest in people, invest in places, and divest from racism. Thank you all so much.